Welcome to Nurture Your Newsletter. I'm so happy you're watching this masterclass because it means you feel a nudge bending in the direction of starting or deepening a connection with your readers. And as a writer, I believe that one of the most important relationships you can cultivate over the course of your career is with your readers. And today I'll be sharing a simple 6-step framework that guides you through everything you need to start and grow a newsletter. We'll be going over the why you need a newsletter in the first place, how to overcome the fear of putting yourself out there, how to come up with topic ideas, how frequently to send a newsletter, and how to easily get set up with the right software. So you are in the right place if you are a writer who doesn't have a newsletter yet, and you might have thought about starting one. You do have a newsletter already and you want a little more direction or inspiration. You're feeling a little bit nervous about putting yourself out there, which is totally normal. And you are unsure of what to write. This is a really popular stumbling block. So if anything here resonates or all of the above, there is something in this workshop that should help. My goal for the end of our time together is for you to feel excited about this aspect of your writing life and truly empowered to get started in a way that feels really doable and fits within the context of your own life at this point. And just so you know where we're headed today, this is what we'll be spending our time chatting about. First, we'll go over why writers need a newsletter. We'll talk about what to write, and I'll show you some examples of other writing and author newsletters. We'll go over some simple decisions that you need to make in order to get started. I'll share my easy workflow tips to make sure that writing a newsletter doesn't feel like another task you have to just put on a long list of things you have to do. We'll talk about how to choose your ESP, which is your email service provider. I'll also be sharing the one that I recommend. And then we'll be talking about how to create and send your newsletter. So before we get too far into things, I did want to say a more formal hello and let you know a bit more about me. So for those of you who haven't met me yet, I'm Nicole Galata. I'm the author of 2 books, the literary cookbook, Eat This Poem, and most recently, Wild Words, Rituals, Routines, and Rhythms for Braving the Writer's Path. I'm also the founder of the Wild Words Collective, which is a private Facebook group for writers. I live outside of Raleigh, North Carolina, where I work as a freelance writer. I'm an INFJ and an Enneagram 5 with a 4 wing. I am a very enthusiastic tea drinker. My superpower is having a really strong strategy streak. My brain is very wired for organization and plans and big picture thinking, but I'm also really empathetic and I take a kind of body first approach to everything. I believe in slow living, embracing seasons, and using rest as a catalyst to creativity. And I decided to put this masterclass together for 2 reasons. The first is in all my years of blogging, book writing, and course creating, starting and growing a newsletter has probably been the biggest driver of my overall success as a writer. Being able to support a community of readers and build trust with them over time is the reason that they and you really have signed up to be part of my launch team for my books, or bought my books, or come to events, or purchased programs that I've offered, and even signed up for this masterclass. A newsletter puts you in front of people who resonate with your message and are eager to hear from you, which is so invaluable. And it's also a really great privilege as well. The second reason I wanted to put this together is because after years of bouncing between different services, I found what I believe to be my forever home when it comes to email marketing. And I was just so excited to be able to share it with you. So I'll be talking more about this later on, but I absolutely love the program. And when I found out that they were allowing affiliates to offer not only a free 30-day trial, so you can check it out for a month, but also 50% off the monthly fee forever and ever, I knew that now was the time to launch this training and get it into your hands. Now, You know me, and I never give ultimatums. So that means in addition to telling you about the program that I love most and providing an affiliate link for you to use, I'll also take you through some of the other programs that might be a better fit for you right now. It's really important to me that you choose the option that's right for you and your circumstances, regardless of whether or not I receive an affiliate commission for it. So with that being said, let's get into our first topic, why writers need a newsletter. So really the first step in starting your newsletter is just having a really good handle on the why. Why do you even need one in the first place? And why should you spend your time sending one? So when I ask writers about newsletters, I get these common responses. I don't see why I need one. I'm waiting until I have something to share. I haven't written a book yet, and I don't know what to write. I'm someone who approaches my creativity with a seasonal lens, and having a newsletter is definitely part of the season of visibility because it requires that you put yourself out there. It might not be showing up in a bookstore or at an event on a stage, but sending a newsletter, or even just the idea of sending a newsletter, might make you feel a little bit vulnerable. Nervousness is a pretty normal reaction, especially when you might have some self-doubt around growing your list or finding readers or even losing subscribers after they've signed up, which happens. Every newsletter I send out, I always lose a few people. That's just how it works. So something really important to keep in mind is the newsletter that you send out now at this moment in time. If you watch this masterclass and you do all of the steps and, in a week or two, you send out your first newsletter, everything that happens from this point on will evolve. So I'll be mentioning this idea more than once as we move through because it's so important. It's really easy to get stuck in this fear of not doing things right or not having permission to change something after we've started. But I sort of see newsletters like this living, breathing thing. You'll learn things over time. You'll experiment. You might change your frequency as life demands it. It'll grow with you. So don't worry about having everything be perfect before you start. My first newsletters, by the way, and I'm sure some of you watching were around way back in 2013, they were all over the place. I sent out musings and thoughts, just whatever happened to be my mind at the time. I didn't have any schedule. Sometimes it was once a week or 3 weeks would go by. I sent newsletters on different days at different times. There was no consistency at all. Now I have a firm schedule and I communicate that with my audience, but I didn't start out so organized and streamlined. So again, this is permission to evolve, and I'm also hoping that you avoid some of my early mistakes as well. So there are three main reasons why writers need a newsletter. And so these are the things that convinced me and still convince me that newsletters are so essential. So the first one is you own your list. So if you're building a community on Facebook, or if you have thousands of Instagram followers, or you're really active on Pinterest and you're generating traffic to your website, or you participate in Twitter chats, all of those things are great and they're worthy components of your overall engagement strategy in your writing life, but you don't own a single email address from anyone on social media. So that means you're at the mercy of algorithms, which we know, especially in recent years, have been changing very frequently. And people haven't given you explicit permission to contact them, which means that even though they might like your announcement when your new book comes out, or they might leave a comment, they might not feel as motivated to take action because you haven't been in their inbox for months or for years. So for example, many of you watching are part of the Wild Words Collective, which is my writing community on Facebook. And it's a really thriving space where we have lots of great conversations and support each other. But if Facebook combusts tomorrow, what is going to happen to my community? Well, as you know, I make an invitation to that private group contingent on signing up for my newsletter. So I have a way to personally contact everyone. So for that reason, I see social media more as a supplement to my newsletter. Something else to keep in mind when you're comparing a newsletter to a Facebook page or your Instagram account is really a numbers game. So the way that algorithms work right now. And depending on when you're watching this masterclass, a few things may have changed. But when it comes to organic reach, so this is your reach without paying for advertising. The CEO of Instagram was recently quoted as saying, on average, people miss about 70% of the posts in their Instagram feed. And other stats have found that organic reach is around 20%. So the platform used to show photos chronologically in feeds, but it is now switched to making choices based on what Instagram thinks users want to engage with. So let's say you have 1,000 Instagram followers, and when you put up a new post, only 200 of them might see it. And so on average, the number of followers engaging with that content is only around 2%. So for Facebook, at one point, even before some of the recent changes that kind of transformed our news feeds recently, fans were only seeing about 16% of posts on pages that they liked and followed. Email, on the other hand, and you see that last bullet point, is much more algorithm proof. 71% of people start their day looking at email. And industry averages for folks in the arts and artist space hovers around 27% with a click rate of 3%. A lot of writers, myself included, report much higher open rates because they're speaking to a really targeted audience of people who are deeply interested in what they have to say. So my own open rate has been as high as actually in like the 60s and 70s, depending on how targeted my list is, but it averages around 43% with a click rate of about 20%, which is much higher than average. So if you are someone who uses Instagram or Facebook to nurture your community already and you enjoy that space, you could very easily take your captions and prompts and repurpose them into a newsletter format. So just in case you were thinking that sending a newsletter is going to just add to all the work that you need to do, I'm a huge fan of recycling content in different ways. So even if you're getting great engagement on social media, you don't have to walk away from that, but it would be great to take the existing content that you have, or maybe a prompt from the week, and just put that in your newsletter. So it won't take as long to put everything together. And then you have the added benefit of owning those email addresses. And we'll talk a bit more about workflow later on, as I mentioned, but I just wanted to encourage those of you who do love social media to consider the value of adding a newsletter to your arsenal of ways to engage with your readers. But enough about the numbers. The main thing to remember here is, more than the numbers themselves, is that when you own your list, you have an edge over social media in terms of your reach. And there are a couple of other things to consider as well. So think of any relationship in your life: your partner, your parents, your boss, coworkers, other writers, parents at your kids' school. Every relationship we have requires some kind of effort. And going back to vulnerability, to mention early on, it's often when we share and are open with one another that those relationships really deepen. We have to show up to listen, to help, and we have to do it over time. That's what builds trust. So someone who joins your list tomorrow may not be your biggest fan immediately, but give them a few months. Give them some emails that reveal who you are and what you're about and how you can serve them and encourage and support them. And that's how you develop long-term relationships with readers. This is not an overnight thing. We have to be in it for the long term and see a newsletter as a true investment in your writing life. There are plenty of trainings out there that talk about how to get 1,000 or 10,000 subscribers to your list in a very short amount of time. And the trick usually is to have paid advertising, or to do something that requires an enormous amount of work, like hosting an online summit where you're leveraging the mailing lists of all your guests. That's not the kind of thing I'm talking about today. I'm talking about the long haul, the slow and steady wins the race kind of approach. The goal here is to attract readers who will support and magnify your work and build relationships that are mutually beneficial over time. When I started my first newsletter in 2013, I'd already been blogging for almost 5 years at that point, and I wasn't making any money at all. I wasn't one of those bloggers who did sponsorships or had enough traffic to put advertising on her site. But I was pretty convinced that one of the best ways to support myself was to gather people in my orbit who were interested in some of the same things as I was and to provide some kind of value to them. We all want to feel seen and heard and understood, and having a newsletter is a chance to do that for other people. I've gotten replies from folks who simply say, "Thank you, I've been feeling the same way," or "It's nice to know someone else struggles with this too." That's a really powerful thing. As writers, I think that most of us are hoping that our words, whether it's in a book or an article we write or through our poetry, whatever it is, impacts and inspires people. And a newsletter is one of the ways to do that on a very intimate level. And it puts you in a position that when bigger things happen, like you do have a book or you're doing some speaking or hosting workshops, you have writing that's being published online and you want to share it, you have this built-in audience of people who want to help spread your message. And in between, you're providing real value to them on the other end of your emails. So the third thing to remember is to be of service. So most writers don't like to talk about their work in the context of being a brand or a business. And many writers I've spoken to say, "I don't need a newsletter because I don't have something to sell or I haven't written a book yet." And maybe you don't have a book or courses or workshops or products that you're selling. But if you're someone who does want to write a book one day, who has even the smallest dream to share your work with others in any capacity, a newsletter will help build a groundswell of support. So when you do step into that space or you have a publication date on the calendar, you have direct communication lines to people who want to hear from you and believe in what you have to offer. There is an entrepreneur named Amy Porterfield who has this saying I really love. And she says, "The success of your launch is directly related to how you show up when you're not launching." And she was talking specifically about online courses, which is something that she teaches entrepreneurs how to do. But translated for the context of writing, it would be something like this. The success of your book promotion is directly related to how you show up when you're not promoting a book. So I wrote my newsletter for 4 years before my first book came out. Everyone on my launch team came from my newsletter, and same goes for my second book. In other words, if you are waiting to start a newsletter until you have a book deal or your manuscript is done, that's probably not a great time to start a meaningful newsletter. Like we've been talking about, relationships take time. So you want to focus on the long game here. If you think you might write a book in a year, in 3 years, in 5 years, if you know you want to teach workshops, etc., you need people on your team, people in your community and readers who can help your message get out into the world. And you need to be of service to them. And again, like we talked about, help support them and encourage them and nurture them along the way. So that way, when you do send more promotional emails, which will be fewer and far between, everyone will be primed and ready for it as part of your evolution as a writer. So what do you write in these emails? One of the biggest barriers to starting a newsletter is the issue of not knowing what to write. So let's demystify that, because once you have a better idea about what to share in your newsletter, you'll automatically be more excited and ready to move ahead. So one of the reasons that we don't know what to write is because we haven't identified what we have to offer. And that can feel very paralyzing when you can't pinpoint the value that you bring to a potential audience. So that's what I want to talk about first. And it starts with a simple truth, and that is a newsletter is less about you and more about your readers. Now, that's not to say that you aren't there sharing your stories, of course, and guiding the conversations, but a newsletter isn't really about getting something off your chest. It's more about adding value to the lives of people who sign up and give you their email address. It's about inspiring, instructing, educating, or sometimes a combination of all three, depending on your style. And if you're thinking, I don't have anything to offer, I'm not an expert, or I'm not running a business, or any other narrative that's going on, to that I would just like to say, It's your inner critic talking. It's very easy to believe that we don't have something to offer. And when I say a newsletter is about your readers, I'm not saying you have to come up with some profound life lesson to share in every newsletter or develop some detailed curriculum for them to learn something. All you really have to do is be yourself. All newsletters are unique in that way. And you just want to have that mindset that's built around service. So the question to keep in the forefront of your mind as you start exploring what's possible with your own newsletter is, how can I serve my readers? And now that we've talked about the purpose behind the newsletter and why you need one, and the fact that you do offer value and you do have something to offer, let's get practical and dive into what that might look like. And I want to show you some examples because I feel like it's the easiest way to just get a broad sense of what's possible and give you some ideas for what you might want to use in your own newsletter. And I also really want to encourage you to sort of do a bit of a newsletter audit for newsletters that you're already receiving and that you enjoy, and take a look at how those newsletters are structured and what they're sharing, and see if you can spot some trends. That'll also give you some ideas. So for this step in the process, it's really kind of a choose your own adventure type of experience. As we move through these examples, just start paying attention to what is resonating with you and might be something that you want to emulate in some way in your own newsletter. So the first one is Krista O'Reilly. So she is a writer. She's a writer and offers coaching and membership programs. And her newsletter is really meant to encourage and inspire. This kind of newsletter is a very popular one. We all need encouragement and inspiration in our day. So don't feel like you have anything less valuable to offer just because you're not teaching something directly. She will typically include a note up top, and then down below, you'll see her informing readers about any offerings that she has coming up, like any programs. And then we have Tish Oxenreiter. So her weekly newsletter includes a very short note about something going on in her world. It's super brief, and then she links out to things that are inspiring or helpful or interesting. And she also includes links to her own site, which you might want to consider if you do have a regular blog. So in this way, Tish serves as a curator. It's a list-based newsletter. It's short and sweet, and it points you to both places online that you might find information, as well as her own website. Next, we have Emily P. Freeman. She is an author who also has a podcast, and a lot of her work focuses on a faith-based perspective, but that doesn't necessarily dominate her newsletters. They're actually kind of these monthly roundups of what she's learning, which I always really enjoy reading. They also live as blog posts on her website. So this is a case of remembering not to reinvent the wheel. If you're someone who does blog semi-regularly, you can have your newsletter coincide with a post and essentially use some of the sentences or a paragraph in your blog post, maybe just tweaked a little bit for your newsletter, and then push people to your website to read the rest of it. So don't feel like you have to create something brand new every time. And her website is her newsletter is a great example of that. I always recommend reusing and repurposing content in different ways, because like we talked about with algorithms and things, there are probably very few people across every single channel you're on that will see 100% of everything you write. Next, we have Sarah McKettick, and she has written several books. She has one at the time I'm recording this, she has one coming out now. So she does talk a little bit about the behind the scenes process, things like recording her audiobook or getting blurbs and all of that, which is, if you are someone who is writing a book and that's part of your writing life, it's great to be able to just talk about, what's going on behind the scenes. So she writes a lot about motherhood, both online and in her books, and her newsletter is it really feels like getting a letter from a friend. She puts a personal photo up top. And then she kind of writes a long note about what's going on. And at the bottom, she has sections for writing news and then reading recommendations, so books that she's recently finished or podcasts and things. So I wanted to include this example because honestly, this is a really great place to start. You can just share whatever is on your mind right now, what's going on. The more you do it, the more you'll get ideas for things to try or learn what your audience might be interested in based on something that you wrote. And when you're just getting started and getting into the habit of sending a newsletter and being personal, just think of it like writing a note to your friend. That's all your newsletter has to be. Next up, we have Albert Flynn de Silver, and Albert is an author, a speaker, and a teacher, and he does a lot of events throughout the year, so his newsletters often serve as reminders for what's coming up and how you can work with them or sign up for his programs. But much of the time, in addition to doing promotional content, he shares a free mindfulness video that are hosted on YouTube. And that's sort of his free offering to readers. So it's just an example too, if you're someone who really likes recording audio files or you are comfortable doing video, you can incorporate that into your newsletter as well. And finally, I wanted to mention my newsletter, which is probably the place where a lot of you first heard about this masterclass. So as I mentioned, mine has really evolved over the years, but now I write a personal note at the top, a little bit of a letter, and then I have a section called Goodreads where, just like Tish, I'm acting as a resource by curating links that focus on my personal core topics, which tend to be things like writing, mindfulness, creativity, and food. And then at the bottom, I put anything more promotional, whether it be a new podcast episode, upcoming events that I might be having, or reviews from books, etc. So I really kind of have a hybrid model where I include a note, I include good links, and then I also include a promotional section. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that you have something to offer. These questions, this is really a great way in to start thinking about this for yourself. So these questions can help get you started in terms of figuring out how to position yourself in your newsletter and figure out what you might want to start talking about. So what kind of writer are you? Are you someone who writes fiction, nonfiction, poetry? Do you write a lot for magazines? What core topics do you write about? In general, most people will probably be writing about more than one thing. So these big bucket topics can provide inspiration for your content, as well as just draw people in who are interested in exploring these topics a little bit more. What do you know something about? What is something that people often ask you advice about, or what are you already a resource for? And then how do you want people to feel when they get an email from you? This can give some clues to the kind of tone you might want to set. I do want to emphasize too, as you're kind of journaling and figuring this out, don't overthink this. Like I said, a friendly, thoughtful note is a perfect way to start. You don't need to do anything fancy. And just remember, over time, things will evolve. So knowing more about your perspective and topics that you become known for will only help refine your newsletter as you go. And something else I want to mention, we touched on this briefly, but if you are someone who just loves being on social media and you get a lot of meaningful engagement there, take your captions and your prompts and use those as a starting point for your newsletter. Content recycling. You do not have to start from scratch. So in conclusion, you can just write a note, share something you're learning or struggling with. Just be yourself, be human, be personal. Invite people to reply at the end of your newsletter so you can have deeper conversations. The point is to do this in a way that feels true to you and what you're about. And when you're approaching a newsletter from this kind of place, as opposed to trying to just copy what works for someone else, the whole process will feel more easeful and more enjoyable and not just something you have to check off a to-do list. So I included, when you signed up for this masterclass, there is a PDF with more ideas for what to write. But these are just 10 newsletter topics that you can add to your list right now. So you could do book reviews and recommendations. You can share favorite poems. I've done that in newsletters in the past. You can share about your journaling process, how you research novels, the top X things you learned from graduate school, favorite books about X, Y, and Z, whatever topic you choose, or favorite podcasts to listen to, advice you'd give your younger self, 10 things you learned in the past year, journaling prompts, or resources for the area of expertise that you are known for. And something else to think about when you are brainstorming content is there a topic that you could share more about and go a little more in depth on, and actually break that out into a 3 or 4 email series. And then you can also position it as a blog post or a series of blog posts too. That could just give you a lot of content right there. So if you have a big topic, think about how you might be able to extend it over the course of several newsletters. And then already you have a lot of your dates filled in. So this should not be something that feels forced. You really want to just, write what comes naturally. And these kinds of prompts will just give you ideas for ways to start. And as you practice writing them, you might realize, you know what? You really, really love sharing book reviews and people enjoy reading them. Or you absolutely love sharing about how to do research for your writing projects. Maybe you started sending out a list of favorite poems or sharing some of your own work, and then you realized, you know what? I don't really love that. I'm going to pivot to something else. All that is good information. Again, just remember that evolution, that things will change as you go. I wrote a literary food blog back in the day and was really more known for food writing and poetry when I started my newsletter. But the reason I started my newsletter was to talk about creativity, because those conversations didn't really work perfectly on my food blog. And as I shared earlier, when I first started, there was no plan. I was just making it up as I go along and trying to make it a habit and get to know people. I am much more strategic now, but that didn't happen all at once. And the last thing to keep in mind here is that you don't have to write about writing necessarily, or it can be a mix. So you might spend a lot of time on social media talking about issues that are important to you, like social justice or mindfulness or healthy eating or whatever. All those different parts of you can show up in a newsletter. I think the most important thing here is to just let people know what to expect. So when they're signing up, you can say, enjoy musings on X, Y, and Z, kind of whatever those core topic areas you think might be coming up. And in a minute, we're going to be talking about how to structure a newsletter. But I wanted to mention audience and who you're writing to. So audience can really kind of be its own training, but I just wanted to encourage you at this stage, if you're just starting out or refreshing an existing newsletter, is to just start. So Marie Forleo says that clarity comes from action, not thought. And the idea of who is my audience and trying to answer that question is something that will really be refined over time. You want to be thinking about, who are the people signing up? What are their motivations? What do they need from me? What would they like? Are they writers, not writers? Maybe a mix. Again, this will all evolve as you start sending a newsletter more regularly. You can do occasional surveys to find out more about your audience, but don't let not knowing everything stop you from starting. Depending on what you write about, your audience will likely either be made up of other writers who are both interested in what you write and the writer's life generally, and or readers who resonate with your core topics, or some combination. So one example is Andy Cumbo Floyd, and she has newsletters that are actually segmented based on the kinds of writing she does. So one is specifically for writers, and then she has another segment. Actually, she might have 3. Another segment is for the historical novels that she writes. And then a final segment is people that are interested in her cozy mystery series and just mystery writing in general. So for example, let's say you're a mom who writes about the intersection of wellness and parenthood. You might share personal stories in your newsletter, or backstories of essays that you've had published, just tidbits of your life to help other moms feel like they're less alone. Maybe you write about overcoming something like chronic pain or trauma, and you can share your story in different ways, share what's been helpful to you, maybe online resources for people to help encourage others to heal. If you're a writer of historical fiction, you might have a lot of writers on your list who would be interested in learning more about research and character development, or readers who just love history and want more behind the scenes or fun tidbits about your process. If you're a poet, you can share a poem in every newsletter, either your own or a favorite poem of someone else's with maybe a little bit of commentary, or you can share a writing prompt. And when it comes to deciding how vulnerable to be, that's really entirely up to you. So sharing personal stories is an important and essential way to connect, but you don't have to include every last detail to make it impactful. It's really about your own comfort level. And when you start receiving responses back from readers, that might also help you gauge the right balance that's going to feel good for you. So as you can see, there's a lot of directions to go. And just remember, clarity comes from action, not thought. You will learn so much more by doing it and forming a newsletter habit than staying in your head and trying to figure everything out before you start. So now we can talk about taking some action. And the third step is going over a few simple decisions that you need to make in order to get started. So we've talked about why you need a newsletter, what to write, how to start thinking about your audience, and these are some of the decisions that you need to make to move forward. So first up, you want to figure out what your newsletter style is going to be. Do you want to write a personal note? Do you want to make it a list? Do you want to include some kind of writing prompt or book reviews? Are you going to have a newsletter that curates things or kind of does roundups for certain topics? Or might it be a combination, which it very well could be? Next, you want to figure out your frequency. So I always recommend choosing your frequency based on what's happening in your life right now, not some aspirational set of circumstances. If you are brand new, I don't recommend starting a weekly newsletter. It can be really overwhelming to commit to that. Every other week is great. Monthly is a way that you can just start forming that habit. And then as you build your newsletter and learn more or things change, you can make tweaks, always just letting people know along the way that there might be a change. I find that overcommitting is one pretty much guaranteed way that you'll burn out or feel bad for not sending a newsletter. So at this point, decide whether you want to do, monthly to get started, every other week if that feels doable for you. Weekly, I only started sending a weekly newsletter maybe about a year before Wild Words came out. So if you're kind of heading into a promotional season, weekly can be great because it gets your name into people's inboxes more frequently. And then you can also think about, especially if you do every other week or monthly, you can also send special emails for certain events or programs. And in your newsletter, in addition to whatever you do, whether it's prompts or links or a note, in the bottom, you also want to include some things about you. So depending on what your writing life looks like right now, you might be able to push people to a blog post. You can send people to social media. If you have been on a podcast or you have a podcast, if you have books, definitely include that. Any sort of offering, workshops, coaching, etc. If you are a writer that has a Patreon account, don't forget to include some things from your own writing world. So newsletters really do serve a dual purpose of course, providing value to your audience and you being of service to them, but also informing them about your work and where they might be able to find you online. So step 4, I mentioned this early on, workflow. So something that is very easy to overlook when you have a newsletter or any kind of project really is a workflow. When you start feeling overwhelmed, it's often because you don't have a system in place and you need that foundation. If you are already sending a newsletter but find the process to be cumbersome, a little streamlining can go a really long way. Now, I said that I flew by the seat of my pants at the beginning, and I did, but I highly recommend coming up with an easy workflow that supports you to make things feel as easy as possible. So in your workflow, you'll have a few different phases. You'll kind of have the idea generation phase or capturing ideas, writing and drafting, editing, scheduling, and then responding to messages that come in. So for me personally, I organize my newsletter in Google Docs. And I also use a template for all of my newsletters, which makes it really simple because it includes all the sections that I include in my newsletter with space for my note and my links and promotions, etc. So creating a custom newsletter template will save you a lot of time down the line. And it's something at the beginning of every year, typically, I tend to go through this process and update my newsletter template. I create documents for all my upcoming newsletters, so everything is just ready to go. So, for example, if you have decided to do a monthly newsletter, once you have your template, you can create 12 individual documents and save them in a folder along with your template, and then you are ready to go. So it really just saves you all those extra steps when you're sitting down to write. So in a newsletter template, you'll want to include things like any boilerplate copy in the introduction and the footer. So anything that's going to always be in your newsletter. So if, for example, if at the beginning of your newsletter, if you are going to be using affiliate links from Amazon or other programs, you want to be sure to include that at the top. So that might be something that's always there. At the bottom, you might want to mention something about, social media or where to find you, etc. You want to have space for a little note to readers, whether it's short or long. Again, that's up to you. And kind of a closing PS section. A PS section, if you have something to really alert people to, is a great way to make sure that people see it, because a lot of people, as much as we want to believe, they're all just pouring over our newsletters with a warm beverage in their hand. A lot of us skim. So doing a PS or bolding something or highlighting it in some way will make sure that their eyes just gravitate towards that. And then you'll want those secondary sections, those promotional sections, links, social media, podcasts, books. You also, which I realize I did not put on this slide, but you'll also want to include a space for the date and then your subject line as well. That's going to be really important also. And so, like I said, once I have my template set up, I will create them in advance for all the weeks I'm planning to send a newsletter. You can make this an annual ritual, and then you sit down to write, and literally every single page is ready to go. So in terms of creating a folder structure, you can do this either in Google Docs or on your computer. This is going to keep you organized. So you'll want to create a folder called newsletter. And inside that, you're going to have your newsletter template. And then you'll have also another document called newsletter ideas. This is basically your brain dump where you can track any ideas that are coming in, or if you are someone who uses a note app on your phone, like I often do, you can eventually transfer everything there. So it's all in one place. And then you'll want a secondary folder inside your newsletter folder called drafts. And there are two ways you can approach this. You can do one document for each newsletter. That's great, especially if you're only doing monthly, because 12 isn't really too many documents to have in there. And you can just organize them. You can title them by date, so they are chronological. Something I started doing at the beginning of this year is I just created one document for everything. And in Google Docs, I can use the outline function. So I can basically create a header for all of my dates. So I can very easily access, and it just essentially in the left-hand column, it creates a table of contents for you that you can click on. So I can click for something in January, I can go down and click something in August, and it'll automatically take me to that page. So it's up to you, but I highly, highly recommend creating a simple folder structure. And then once you've done that, if it's web-based, at least if it's in Google Docs, add that link as a favorite in your browser toolbar. So all you have to do is just click that button and you can access it. So you're just saving keystrokes, which seems like it won't make that big of a difference, but in the moment and over time, being streamlined is really, really helpful. And as part of your workflow throughout the year, something you can do is schedule brainstorming sessions as well. And the need for that might depend on how frequently you're sending your newsletter, but even just blocking out an hour twice a year to look over all your notes and ideas, or grab links for places your work has appeared recently, or set some themes for upcoming newsletters will help you feel like it isn't just a last minute scramble, but you can prepare ahead of time and schedule in advance. I could go on and on about organization, but I'll cap it there for now, and we will move on to choosing your email service provider, your ESP. So, in addition to not knowing what to write, not knowing which program to choose can also be a really major stopping point for people, because there are a lot of companies out there. So, when I got started in 2013, MailChimp was really the main option, that and Aweber, which was really geared more towards corporate businesses. And I also professionally, at jobs I worked for, I used Constant Contact a lot. So every platform has pros and cons. They all have different pricing structures and features. So the question becomes, how do you choose the right one for you? So I'm going to share my history with email software briefly and then share my recommendations. So as I mentioned, I started with MailChimp for my personal newsletter. The biggest benefit to MailChimp, and still is the biggest benefit, I think, is that it offers a free plan for up to 2,000 subscribers. Once you have a paid account, you can do custom branding. You can segment subscribers, which is really helpful. And MailChimp offers a lot of templates that make it easy to kind of customize your look. And the prices, once you get to that point, it can go up to, $250 a month, depending on the tier that you're at. So when you are just starting out, though, that free plan is really a big, big reason to go with MailChimp, because you can build your list over time. You don't have to pay until you reach more than 2,000 subscribers, which for most writers is going to take a reasonable chunk of time. Now, MailChimp also owns a platform called TinyLetter, which is totally free all the time. And it's basically designed for people who don't need or want any of the bells and whistles of a more robust system. So if you just want to write a simple note to get started and you're planning on doing just a letter to your readers, TinyLetter could be a really great pick. Now, for me, once I got to the level where I had to start paying, I actually switched to ConvertKit, because ConvertKit is amazing at segmenting. So as your list grows and you find that you are maybe sharing more things, or kind of the business aspect of your writing life is evolving, being able to segment your list is a huge help in getting the right message in front of the right people, or building lists of people who want to hear about something particular that you might be offering. So if, like I mentioned that example of Andy Cumbo Floyd, if you write different kinds of books and want to have segments based on interest, you can do that. You can segment people based on locations if you're doing events or traveling. You can segment people based on the various places they've signed up on your site. So if you offer, a free course about X, Y, and Z, you can tag people who took that course as interested in that topic, and then target emails to them in the future when you might have a paid offering. And if you're not doing anything like that, or you have no plans to do that at all, start with TinyLetter or start with MailChimp. And then if you end up doing courses or workshops, or you have books, you can transfer everything over. ConvertKit, it took them a long time to offer it, but they do now have a free plan that lets you unlock up to 100 subscribers to get into their system. And then you can share that link with other people to unlock more and more subscribers that are free. But here is the problem that I have found with both MailChimp and ConvertKit, though, or any other program that has a pricing structure based on the number of subscribers that you have. So MailChimp and ConvertKit, the more subscribers you have, the greater your monthly fee will be. So these companies are assuming that if you have more people on your list, you're making more money and can afford it, because presumably you're selling things to a larger audience. And for a lot of companies, that is true. But for writers, not all of us are making a residual income every month from our writing. So it can be difficult to invest the disposable income that we do have to email software, especially when it just inches up and up over time. So within the last 6 months, I was getting to the point where my tier with ConvertKit was about to change. And of course, I thought there's no way I'm giving up my newsletter, but I really wasn't that excited to pay an extra $30 a month to use their service and basically get financially penalized for growing my audience. And that is when I made the switch to Flodesk. The amazing thing about Flodesk, purely from a financial perspective, is that Flodesk offers a flat monthly fee. It's $38 a month, which is incredibly reasonable considering most other programs are more at the $50 threshold once you're over 2,000 subscribers. So for that reason alone, I was pretty much sold. But in addition to that, Flodesk makes beautiful, beautiful emails. They have built-in templates that make it so easy to drag and drop and create different sections of your emails. And if you want to just do a simple text and write a letter, you can do that as well. You don't have to do anything fancy. Flodesk also offers segmenting, very similar to ConvertKit. So you can still tag people and segment based on interest and create what they call workflows, which is essentially an email sequence. So for example, if you have signed up for my email courses, Write with Intention, or the Uncover Your Origin Story training, those have multiple emails that go out on different days. And so that's called either a sequence or a workflow, depending on which platform you're using. I think ConvertKit calls it a sequence. So anyway, when you're just starting out, this won't be a huge focus, but it's really nice functionality to have as you grow over time and you're thinking about being able to sort of future-proof your newsletter. So I was basically, I don't know why this is not clear. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. So I was basically ready to switch over and give Flodesk my credit card. And then I found out that through affiliates, I could sign up to try Flodesk free for 30 days, which is great. But then I could also lock in 50% off the price. So $19 a month, less than $20 a month forever, which is huge. And so that rate will never change. So even when your audience grows, unlike MailChimp and ConvertKit, whether you have 1,000 subscribers or whether you have, 6,000 subscribers, you will always pay the same monthly fee, which is $38 a month. But if you use my affiliate link, you can get it for $19 a month and keep that price as long as you are using their system. So if you would like to learn more and tinker around and give it a try, you can go to thewildwords.com/Flodesk. Now, my goal is for you to find the right program to fit your needs. Although you might ultimately switch down the line, if you're more comfortable starting with a free plan, that is a great way to begin your newsletter journey. And I always recommend starting there if that feels right to you. If you're ready to move ahead with a more robust program that has some extra features, or you're not happy with your current provider or just don't want to pay the escalating fees, Flodesk is my personal software of choice. And again, if you want to check them out, I'd appreciate you using my affiliate link because it helps support me and my work. So you can go to thewildwords.com/Flodesk. Okay. So we have covered a lot of ground, and now we are at the point where you are ready to send your first newsletter. So regardless of which provider you are using, you'll need to go through the same process behind the scenes to get yourself up and running and get subscribers to sign up. Now, I included a PDF checklist when you signed up for this masterclass, but here's a look at some things that we have talked about so far in terms of what you need to do. And you can just print out that checklist or use the PDF to guide your way through as you are getting started. So you want to decide on your style and frequency. You want to choose your email service provider. You want to create a newsletter template and set up your writing workflow, including that folder structure I mentioned. You want to set aside a little bit of time to brainstorm some topics. And then in order to get people to sign up, you need to create a landing page. So whatever your website address is, you can create a page that's just titled newsletter. So it'll be www.yourwebsite.com/newsletter. And then in your service provider, whether it's Flodesk or MailChimp or whatever, you can design a form to capture email addresses and then embed that onto your newsletter website. So that's how people are going to get into your system. And then the other thing you want to do is once you have that link and you have a landing page on your site, you want to put it out there. So include that in your email signature, put it on social media. If you are, writing articles for websites in your bio, typically you can put a link in there, so you can include that if you can. And then, you want to send your first newsletter. So in general, just a few tips, no matter what kind of newsletter you're sending, you want to make sure that the content is easy to scan. So you can use headers, bolded text, or other visual clues to draw a reader's eye when where you want it to go, or to emphasize an insight that you have. Try to include a call to action, visiting you somewhere online, asking people to reply to your note. And again, my favorite tip, don't be afraid of recycling content. Push people to an existing blog post or article and just share, a few sentences to introduce it. So as we wrap up our time together here, I want to leave you with a few thoughts. Writers need readers. If you want to write a book one day, if you are publishing articles you want people to read and share, if you want someone to come out to an event, all this requires building relationships, and a newsletter is a really amazing way to do that virtually. The first email that you send will be one of probably hundreds that you send over the years. Things will evolve over time. When you embrace this, it's so much easier to let go of the idea that everything has to be perfect before you start, or you need to have everything figured out. I have sent a newsletter for 7 years, and I am still tweaking things and changing things. It's just the nature of the process. And another thing to remember is you are worthy of this work. You have something to offer. I bet you didn't think that a masterclass on newsletters was necessarily going to dig into your inherent worthiness, but it is a piece of the puzzle, because anytime we put ourselves out there, we're taking a risk. But with that risk comes the great potential for connection and understanding. And it's just one more way to make the world feel a little bit smaller and impact people who can benefit from our message while supporting your writing life at the same time. So I really hope that you enjoyed this masterclass. I'm honored that you've spent an hour of your time with me. If you already know the direction you're headed and want to get started with Flodesk, again, you can visit thewildwords.com/Flodesk to learn more. And for those of you who watch trainings and then go about your life, as I have done many times, I will be sending a few extra emails over the next week with some encouragement and reminders to help you get the most out of your training and to make sure that you take action with whatever platform you choose. So if you have any questions in the meantime, you can always reply to any of my emails, and I would be happy to chat.